Welcome back to our Microfocus Security Res Cyber Res series, where we are in episode 6, which brings us to the end of the Security Awareness series podcast. We have gone through measuring cyber resilience. We've gone through why our users and everyone needs to be cyber savvy. We've had a look at how innovation through cyber can be done and reshaped our business. We've spoken about what happens when you've been hacked and how do we cope with that. And we've even examined the software security involved in the software supply chain, which scared the pants off me. Today, we are ending with probably the most important area, which is privacy and cybersecurity, and how do we cope with that from a South African perspective, a SADC perspective, and a global perspective. We've seen a proliferation of government intervention and protection with regards to GDPR, with POPI, and that's all looking at our users and our end users, our customers, and saying, are we looking after their information correctly and responsibly? And now we're overthrowing a security blanket onto that. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. That's why we've got Priyanka. Priyanka, welcome to our episode. I wonder if you could just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and why you are here.
Thanks, Daniel. And I'm so glad to see that someone else is as equally passionate about privacy as I am. So yeah, I'm Priyanka. I'm an associate at ENS Africa, which is a law firm here in Joburg, and we have presence across the continent. And I sit in our technology team, and I do a bunch of different types of tech work, and a large part of that is privacy. So I'm hoping of some use during this session. I hope I'm not going to be boring yourself or anybody else. There's a lot of pressure to be the last one to go. So I hope I can make it sound exciting.
It is very exciting. My first question to you, Priyanka, from a legal perspective, did your position even exist 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Daniel. I think we've seen privacy experts come up in the last few years in particular. But I think it's been something that's been on people's minds for a very long time. I mean, with the issues that happened over the past several years, I think the biggest shock, well, I think from my perspective, was what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And that was just, a few years ago. And that is when I think people really became so shocked when you think, how are you using my data? There's something wrong with how you're using my information. Just something that is, that just shocks you to your core when people actually started questioning what is the meaning of privacy. But yeah, I agree. 10 years ago, I think it was all about commercialization, more about business. Data was used as an asset, no matter, whose data it was used to drive businesses. But now I think there's been that shift, data is no longer just an asset. It's a currency you use, where your reputation as a company is everything. So yeah, it's definitely been something that's been changing. I think it'll be a space that will continue to evolve and change, I think, as privacy takes on different meanings and roles.
Controversial question. Can we actually do anything about what's being done with our data, or is the battle already lost? Do they know everything already?
I want to say that sounds quite cynical, Daniel. So, in my personal view, it's something I've had to wrestle with for some time now. I think, and I'll get to what I think the official professional position should be, but personally, I think we can't expect for our data to remain secret, to remain 100% private, to remain 100% ours. the more digitized we become, the more services we use online, the more we interact with other people on Facebook or Instagram, we're really creating a very large digital footprint. So our data is everywhere. I think unless you're sitting underneath, some kind of rock on a beautiful tropical island somewhere with no Wi-Fi, no cell reception, I think you should expect that you have no privacy. And within that, I think we have to ask ourselves, what are reasonable invasions of privacy? What are reasonable uses of privacy? And then within that, you can then ask those kinds of questions, Daniel. I think as a user, so if I'm on Instagram or just, having this chat with you, I need to kind of be logical and sensible about how much data I'm sharing. Okay. You have to sort of appreciate the platform you're on, the forum you're in, the context in which you're actually, your image, your persona is being put out there. So there are some ways in which I can sort of curb that excessive invasions of my privacy. Okay. At the same time, and I think very importantly, it's the other side of the coin. What is the company's responsibility with my data? Okay. The Facebooks of the world and so on. So there really are these two big role players here, Daniel.
Okay. Or, I mean, we're going onto the big social platforms where it's understood. But if we're just looking at our retail environment where they've got our data because I've been buying stuff from them, that juxtaposition of what I'm sharing with them and I'm on their loyalty program versus how they can use my data in other areas, there's still an area which us as South Africans and POPI coming in, we now seem to have a firm ground on what the data subject can do. Do you think we are educated enough about that? And where does security come into that from a privacy perspective in your mind?
Now, look, a loaded question, but I think ultimately I'm just we're going to be using different pronunciations here, but it's because the law has changed so many times. So there's POPI and POPIA and papaya, but they all mean the same thing. But the beautiful thing that POPI does is it gives the data subject all these rights in respect of the information. And just to take it a few steps back, the data subject is any person whose information is being processed. So I think a common misconception is that these privacy laws only apply to you and I as human beings, but very, very fascinating is that it also applies to companies and entities and juristic persons as well. So
wow, I never thought about that.
It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
We are one of two countries, I think, in the world. I think Colombia is the other one, where we actually recognize the privacy of an entity, which is really interesting. And I think it confuses and baffles people. Why would we worry about the privacy of a company? Why would that matter? And we have this constitution, right? That has wonderful, colorful rights contained in it, and one of them is the right to privacy, and that right protects both us as individuals, but also entities as well, and that's why it is important.
Wow.
So just
Wow.
And that's, you mentioned the GDPR in the beginning, and I think everyone knows about the GDPR. Everyone knows about, I have to do so much with the data I'm processing about individuals. There's lots of measures I have to implement, but all of that equally applies where you're processing and using and dealing a company's information, which is really, really fascinating.
That is fascinating. And if I think of our audience, where we are going from the cyber res perspective across our region, they can really look to the Papaya Act and what we have done here as a beacon to aspire to get a framework in place. And for me, the framework talks about predictability of process, which is where we can secure. Because if we've got a predictable place where we are processing, then we understand what the boundaries are and perimeters, and we can put security software around that. For an elevator pitch for somebody who knows nothing about POPI, so we understand GDPR, could you give me an elevator pitch on what POPI or POPI is for our audience who are not South African?
Sure. So POPI is our governing privacy law that protects the personal information of individuals and entities. It doesn't say you can't use it. It just says what you can do with it, what you can't do with it. So it includes quite, I would think, commercially practical measures to guide our use of that information. And at its heart is this notion of transparency and openness. No one should be surprised by how their information is used.
So if I'm telling you I'm collecting this information in order to send you specials, that's okay. It's if I steal your information and then send you specials, that's not okay because I'm not informing and I haven't given consent.
Yes, absolutely. So there needs to be that transparency. It's achieved in different ways. Yes, I think in the specific context of, like, as you've given with specials, direct marketing, yes, telling someone what you're doing with the information is very important, but there'll also be additional requirements like consent. But absolutely, I mean, if I'm getting an email from someone, or if I find that my data is being used in a particular way, I shouldn't be surprised by it.
Okay.
And of course, we don't click the T's and C's, we don't click the privacy policy at the top of these video meetings or whatever the case is. So we don't really read those T's and C's, but ultimately, that's where they are. And you shouldn't be able to say, oh, I wasn't told about this, or I didn't know you're using my information.
Okay, that's really good. So it's informed consent. Now we've got a company that's storing this data. What is their legal obligation with regards to security here? So just context around this, again, for people who are not in South Africa. Once we've stored the data, the onus is now on the entity to look after that data, as I understand it. What does it mean for us, Priyanka?
So POPI is, as I said, it's quite practical. So it will avoid prescribing the precise measures you have to implement, because this will ultimately depend on you as a company, what data you're sitting with, how much data, of that data. Is it quite risky? So does it have racial information? Does it have biometric information? Is it health data? Is it children's information? So obviously, the more risky your data set, the more security you're expected to implement.
Risky versus risque. We're not talking about nude pictures. We're talking about
Yes, pronunciation is everything. But absolutely. But you know what POPI says is you need to do two things. One, have good, adequate, reasonable, appropriate technical measures, but not technical measures. You also need organizational measures. And what we see a lot of companies do is they focus a lot on the technical measures. So having nice multi-factor authentication, or having passwords, or having really robust antivirus software in place. That's all great. That's all wonderful and necessary. But equally are the organizational measures that are also quite important. And the reason I emphasize that is that you could have the best security in place on your system technically, but if Joe Soap in accounts doesn't understand that he's being phished, or is the phishing emails to him, he just suddenly releases all this data to a hacker or some other malicious actor. That's it. That's your reputation as a company down the line. Done. So it's the people themselves that actually carry so much risk within a business, because they're unpredictable. And I think it's so easy to just do these once-off trainings, when someone joins a company and no one reads the cyber policy, No one reads the fine print. You just tick a box saying, yes, I've read the policies, but you haven't really. And then down the line, a security compromise occurs, whether it's because you've given away more information than you should have, whether you didn't verify who's receiving that information. So it's a lot of risk that sits with the people in a business. And that's why I think POPI places an equal importance on organizational measures in addition to technical.
So Priyanka, if something happens now in our context, in a South African context, who gets marched off for the repercussions? I was going to say the beating in the public square, but who is accountable for this?
Yeah, it's a good question, Daniel. Another thing that distinguishes us from other countries. So we have what's called a responsible party, which is a very descriptive term that means exactly what it is. It's the entity that is responsible for how personal information is used. It's the entity that determines what information it needs, why it needs that information, and it's information relating to its clients, its service providers, its employees. And it is that entity that is required to do all these things to secure the information they're processing, to keep it nice and confidential, keep the integrity of that information intact. And if something goes wrong, if there is a compromise to that information, so if unlawful access to that information, or unlawful access or acquisition of that information, then that entity is on the line. For the public beating, as you call it. And anyone can come after that entity. The POPI leaves it quite open. So it could be me as a data subject, if it was my information that was compromised, my bank account information was leaked, or this entity didn't have good enough security in place to secure my bank information, and someone found a loophole in the system and accessed.
But then who is that person? Or is there a person responsible, or is it a team of people, or what are you seeing in industry?
It would be the company, Daniel. So
we would go for the bank, and the bank would be in trouble. Okay, so it's not an information officer or a security person or an application owner. It's actually the whole entity itself. The bank is in trouble, and they could be held to the fines that POPI has if they were found to be negligent, or if they were found to be.
Yes. So just to qualify that, generally the liability will rest with that entity as the responsible party. There are very limited instances where the information officer of the company may be held liable in their personal capacity. And in fact, criminal fines and even imprisonment can attach to the information officer. Yeah, it's quite serious. And I think it's something that scares a lot of people. But, we follow due process here. So you can't say, well, a data breach has happened, let's go and arrest the information officer. You have to show very, very, in very fine detail what exactly the information officer has done. And the kinds of instances where the information officer, can be found personally and criminally liable is, if there's an account number, that has been compromised, or the information officer fails to, is withholding or concealing personal information. So say, for example, I send a request to a company and I say, hey, I want to know what info you have on me, like give me all you have. And then the company maybe doesn't need to have that information, or maybe they know they're up to no good. So the information officer goes and destroys my records and says, you don't have your information. That act of destruction can be seen as quite, being deceitful, dishonest, and can be criminally punished. So there are very few instances where that personal liability will attach, but it can happen.
Okay. So
in most instances, it will be the responsible party, and there's different consequences. I mean, we have At the moment, the maximum is set to 10 million. So that might not be quite a lot, for some companies that are extremely large, where they can almost afford a 10 million fine. But if you're a small entity, it might be a problem as well. So that can be quite serious. And then,
I haven't stored your email address, Priyanka. I'm just telling you again. now, Priyanka, you said the Chief Information Officer. Did the Chief Information Officer exist before POPI, or is that come because of POPI? Because I see in our notes when we are prepping for this, and we're talking about, privacy and cybersecurity, what should the information officer be doing? And I'm almost taking be doing after a breach, because we know that it's going to happen. Did that person exist before? And is their big mandate then POPI, and how do you deal with these things?
Yeah, so just to take a step back, the information officer, it's a confusing term, because it's not what you would think as the chief information officer of a company necessarily.
Okay.
I think the equivalent that's used in other countries is like data protection officer. So GDPR uses that terminology. There's privacy officer as well, used in other countries. But here we call it the information officer.
Okay.
Person can be anybody. Actually, by default, it's the head of the company.
Okay.
So you authorize somebody else in the company to be the information officer, your CEO is online.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So your CEO could have all of these obligations, and if they aren't being met, then the CEO can again be found personally liable in those very few instances. But that is the information officer. This role that POPI talks about actually was already established in another piece of legislation called the Promotion of Access to Information Act. So I'm not sure if you've heard it, but it's also known as PIA.
Yep.
And that's been around for years and years and years.
Okay.
But there's this interplay between POPIA and PIA, and they really speak to each other in many ways, because ultimately we're dealing with information, where PIA deals with, I want to access information that a particular entity has. How do I go accessing that information? And POPI speaks to the privacy of that information and goes into more granular and comprehensive detail about that. So what the information officer has to do is a lot. So that is new. The roles and responsibilities of the information officer now during POPIA times is very different to what was expected before.
So just pause there, segue in.
Yeah.
Where do we get fast track information about this? Is there a website where we can
Absolutely. Yeah, so the regulator has a website. It's info, I think it's inforeg.gov.za. I'm happy to drop you the link, and then you can share it.
Outstanding. Thank you.
But that really is it's a good source of information. You have a copy of the Act PIA there. POPIA. The regulator has also published all the forms that data subjects can use if they want to send a request to someone and ask for the information, or they want to make a complaint. So really, and it has all of those forms published online.
So another pause for me there. If we had to be putting together a security framework, this is Security Awareness Month, security framework, could I then use that POPI guideline to test my framework against, to make sure I've covered all my data subjects? Would you think that was a good paint by numbers approach if I didn't have a different one?
I think it's definitely a helpful start, Daniel, but I think the tricky thing with POPI, and I think a lot of people who tried to get compliance by the deadline earlier this year in 1 July, that deadline caused a lot of people to think, okay, POPI is just a tick box exercise. I just got to tick all the boxes and all of that, which can be quite difficult, especially, security is an ongoing exercise. And so what POPI says is that you need to regularly assess what data you have, assess the risks to that data in your organization. So you have to actually identify where are the risks in your business. What do those risks look like? Is it because your entire business is online, or is it because you have far too many employees accessing that information? Identify those risks, then put in place measures to mitigate those risks, and then assess those measures all the time, because as you can appreciate, people become more and more sophisticated. As time goes by, they come up with better, more creative ways to hack, to access information they shouldn't be accessing. So you have to keep abreast of the hackers, and you got to keep in line with those trends to remain ahead of them. So it's difficult to look at a framework and say, well, let me just take this. It will ultimately depend on what information you're sitting with, where are those risks, what measures do you have.
If you could get one message across in this month of October, which is Cybersecurity Month, and from a CyberRes perspective, what is the one message you would like to get across to security people who are helping these information officers?
I think the one message is that it's not something that just one person is responsible for. It really is an organizational effort.
Okay.
And it doesn't help for just your head of IT to be driving the whole cybersecurity response of a company. You need your CEO, you need your legal, you need your PR guys, you need all of that kind of coordination internally to effectively detect an incident, and then very importantly, respond to it of a breach. Besides the financial cost, just reputation and commercial damage can be quite devastating. It's taken a very long time to establish itself as a reputable company, as one to be trusted, and it can be a very, it's not just
traumatic.
Absolutely, very traumatic, and it can be embarrassing. It's not nice to have to answer those kinds of questions. No. And you have to be so careful with the words you use, how you use it, who you tell. So because of that, you really do need quite a few people working together to mitigate. And often we see that it's just, someone in IT who was on call that night who picked up the incident, and they end up driving the whole process. And that can be quite risky business. So that
Excellent.
would be
my next question. As we go through October, which is obviously Cybersecurity Month, what's your focus? What are you working on up to the end of this year till the December slowdown? What's your kind of focus for the quarter?
October is also my birthday month, Daniel, so it gives me lots of good energy.
Yes, come on, happy birthday.
Thanks so much. But Daniel, I think the focus remains compliance. I think what we saw was a massive rush by a lot of companies to meet the 1 July deadline, saying, oh, POPI is going to come into force on 1 July. The regulators are going to start knocking on people's doors. So it was very busy at that time. We saw lots of companies racing to get compliant, racing to look at all their gaps in their business, plugging those holes, implementing policies and docs. But what we saw afterwards is a kind of dip, because it happened. And the regulator has been, vocal here and there, has been making some news announcements. But I think what people are waiting for are the fines. They're waiting to see what happens. Does the regulator have teeth? What will actually happen? What we are trying to encourage people to do is not to wait for a fine, because when the fine comes, when the reputational harm hits, it'll be far more costly to react to that than it would be to start looking at your holes now. And companies do have holes, because compliance with POPI is it requires very active and very deliberate steps to be taken. And because of that, it's very likely that if you haven't done anything yet, you are non-compliant, because that are required. And we're hoping that in the next few months, companies start really prioritizing POPI compliance, not because it's a legal issue, but because it's a commercial issue ultimately.
And it's a moral issue. So Maury, come on, it's my data. Come on, people.
Absolutely.
I'm with you.
I really, it's really just about being practical and open with the people you work with, whether those are your employees, your clients, your suppliers. It shouldn't matter. And you want to make sure that those relationships are healthy, that those are good, that they remain long-term. The cancel culture that we're in today, it just takes one problem. And then, your clients are moving on to the next thing. It's very easy to transfer your loyalty. So
now, we've overstayed our welcome in your bedroom. Wow, that sounds bad. That sounds bad. Priyanka, what question should I have asked you that I haven't asked you yet? What did you want to know?
No, I think you've actually covered it all, Daniel. I'm not really, cool. I don't think is anything. I think I try to convey the importance of just how important it is to be aware of what is required to be done in order to safeguard the information you're holding. And it really isn't just the job of the information officer. The information officer is really your coordinator within the organization, but everybody who touches information in the company has a role to play.
Excellent.
Needs to know what privacy is about. So I think that really was the point I want to.
Excellent. Priyanka Naidoo, thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for helping us educate our people, our listeners, for our audience members who are not in South Africa. The POPI Act and the reading around it is really in English. It's self-explanatory. Do yourself a favor, as Priyanka has said, educate yourself, because it's going to be following. The more we mature in this work from anywhere cloud world post-pandemic, information is the currency. People's data is the currency, and we have to get a handle on it, especially from a security perspective. Priyanka, I hope I get to interview you again. You were fabulous. Thank you very much. From my side, Daniel Robus, as the Micro Focus host, I'm going to wish you a wonderful afternoon and a brilliant weekend ahead.